Hello and welcome to my friend the Rainbow Circle, episode number 70. Um, and today I'm finally going to be talking about fiction again, and visual art. And my cat is jumping on my art books. So I wanted to start the pattern of for every episode 0, we talk about a comic book crossover because it's helpful to stop. It's helpful to have some sort of pattern like that, just to give me ideas of what to do. I do that with stories. Every number 14 I reference an angel. Every number 6 I reference death. That sort of thing. But I just had 10 episodes. Here we go. Sit here. I just had 10 episodes on horror movies. So I did want to talk about actual fiction because that's kind of the whole purpose. I'm going to talk about biomorphs, and I'm being swarmed by biomorphs right now. These biomorphs. Okay, you're done? Okay. So anyway, biomorphs are a really fascinating thing, and I don't hear them talked about in many places other than just a very small area, visual art and horror. And biomorphs, and I don't even hear them called biomorphs in discussions of horror, but that's definitely what they are. But I think biomorphs and elementals, we might think of it that way. You hear them framed as elementals or some form of body horror, and they'll have different names, different places. I mean, zombies are arguably a version of this. The Deadites from the Evil Dead series are arguably a version of this. So I did want to talk about 2 actual horror novels. My channel is supposed to be about, my friend the Rainbow Circle is supposed to be about writing fiction, and I've been talking about movies for the last 10 episodes. But there are 2 novels that really influenced the story I'm working on now called Corrosion, which does sound like a horror novel title. But the whole idea of corrosion is the scientist discovers on these water tanks what seems like yarn, like brightly colored yarn. And so I'm sort of riffing on yarn bombing because I love yarn bombing. But she also finds these what seems like hair as well. It's like human hair, and so she does DNA tests and finds that the hair comes from this specific person. And so that was partly influenced by Annihilation. Although, my take on Annihilation is that it's kind of a quirky version of a familiar story. So it's still riffing on biomorphs the same way that the Thing was riffing on biomorphs. It's the manifestation of all of these different biologically complicated mysterious plants, what seem like plants, mysterious mixtures of animals and things like that. But that's just classic going to the root of what makes a horror. And the last episode I talked about the void. That's one of my favorite recent versions of that. I'll take the void over anything else. I'll take the void. I'll take 1,000 voids before Annihilation. Although Annihilation is great. But that goes back to the center of the Rainbow Circle, the visceral stimulation. I think the reference that I think communicates this best, if you ask me, is when William S. Burroughs talks about undifferentiated tissue. This is what helps really clarify how the visceral core really works. In Naked Lunch, he talks about undifferentiated tissue. It can turn into any organ in the human body. So once you get to level 3, you have that sense of internal stability in the sense that in story form, you have stories boiling up from that undifferentiated tissue and turning into any organ. turning into any person, turning into any visual or what have you. Once it boils up from the undifferentiated tissue, once you get to the third level, it goes through the paradoxical level. But once you get to that third level, the schematic level, number 3 right here, it differentiates. So it takes a form. So it may boil up from the undifferentiated tissue and turn into an ear. Then that ear turns into a person, what have you. And that's kind of how the stories work. If you're really diving into your subconscious, and and that's how dreams work. It's things boiling up from your subconscious. In your processing of your subconscious, maybe you lay over these biomorphs, these subconscious hypnagogic biomorphs that boil up from your subconscious. You give them some sort of form that's reasonable. It's a post-rationalization, which I talked about before. If you like a story, you like it on that very, very visceral, irrational level because of the shape of it, the abstract shape of it, because of the color. And by abstract, I mean the visceral abstract. I think it's really important in this discussion to differentiate between the visceral abstract and the cerebral abstract. Cerebral abstract is things like math. If you said 1 + 1, you wouldn't visualize something. But if I said love, it's an abstraction, but it has all of these visceral associations. So that being said, what you like about a story is something that's irrational. It could be the color, it could be the shape, it could be a sound, it could be a word that sounds, triggers something in your visceral core. Why do I love yarn bombing? I have no idea. It's a weird, beautiful thing. Why did I want to write a story about yarn bombing? I have no idea. I just thought it was just really stimulating. So Annihilation takes that idea, and the schematic part that it sort of shakes up and eliminates is certainty about the origin of these biomorphs. So, and that's kind of how that kind of story works. How do you create a sense of fear in weird plants? You have a story about weird plants. How do you create a sense of fear? Because it takes the comforting quality. So, the farther you move out from the center, the more it goes in the direction of comfort. The schematic level is your first real level of comfort. So once you shake up that schematic level where, if you see a plant and then you identify that plant is, an oak tree or what have you, just looking at trees, that plant is an oak tree. That identification within some sort of ordered system gives you a level of comfort. So you recognize it's not a danger. So if you see a biomorph that you can't really identify as anything, it shakes up that level of comfort. So it's disquieting, it's unsettling. In surrealism, it would be uncanny, this uncanny dreamlike effect. So when you read Annihilation or see Annihilation, it had a very lovely movie adaptation with Natalie Portman, one of my favorite actresses, as I've said before. I have all these random papers in here. But the visuals in the movie, certainly I could have predicted that would happen. I'm not too mathematical. But anyway, the visuals in the movie look a lot like Yves Tanguy. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I've heard somebody pronounce that at some point, and I've forgotten. But Yves Tanguy is just what I'm going to go with. But a lot of the visuals in Annihilation look like Yves Tanguy. But those are, just pure classic surrealist biomorphs. I don't even know what I stuff in books. Here's another example of Yves Tanguy. Yves Tanguy. There you go. Yves Tanguy. I just like saying it that way. I don't know. What's really appealing about Yves Tanguy painting? It's not that, you don't look at it and say, oh, that's a depiction of this very particular type of living object that I know. It's, biomorphs boiling up from the subconscious, the undifferentiated tissue of the subconscious. and forming into something that seems somewhat familiar. Something... Guys, settle down. My horror mood lighting. You're knocking over my horror mood lighting. But it's a biomorph that seems somewhat familiar. It has that sort of uncanny effect. And that's just the nature of the uncanny effect, is that you have something that seems familiar, but you can't quite place it. So it gives you this sense, it shakes up that schematic comfort and gives you a sense of, vague dread. I shouldn't say vague, but lurking dread. And so I started off writing my story Corrosion, influenced by Annihilation, and just sort of riffing on Annihilation. Hey guys, both of you don't need to be on my lap. Okay, I'm gonna peek over at the dog biomorphs. There we go. So, riffing on Annihilation, that whole vision of how biomorphs work, but sort of identifying the origin of them is coming from a particular person. So the scientist has to, go investigate this person. It wasn't quite working, and then I sort of shifted to a different elemental horror movie. I mean, horror. I don't think this one has been adapted into a movie, but a horror novel called The Elementals by Michael McDowell. I always want to call him Michael McDonald, but that's not Michael McDonald. It's Michael McDowell. Okay. You don't need to knock over everything. Okay. Stop, guys. What do you want? What do you want? Why do you do this? Okay. I love you, but you have to move your head. Just move your head. There we go. Stay right there. Okay. So, Michael McDowell. And Michael McDowell, the drama wasn't quite working right in my version of Corrosion that was riffing on Annihilation, and I would say, just for me, that's kind of the flaw in Annihilation. It works really well. I wouldn't say Annihilation is it's a perfect novel. It works really well to build sort of the nuance. I mean the ambiance of the mystery of the biomorphs. But it's sort of running on novelty and ambiguity more so than anything else. The Elementals is really a family drama, and it's about this southern family, comes from old money, and they have these houses. There's the rainbow circle. Okay. They have these houses on the beach. My monsters are attacking. Okay. They're reminding me of the crazy skeleton bear, which in the movie, the skeleton bear is really the scariest part, easily. But what was I saying? So they have these houses on the beach, and there's one of the houses is empty and it's full of sand, and it has these elemental spirits, so whatever you want to call them, and they manifest with physical bodies, but they're just these monstrous ghostly figures that you can't really identify or categorize as anything other than just elementals, and they're trying to kill this family, but it's a scary novel, and I would write, I mean, just as a basic book recommendation, I would say definitely read that. But the way it sort of frames the elementals in that case, I mean, Annihilation frames the biomorphs as just this ambiguous mystery, whereas Elementals frames it as something that just goes deep within this family. Now, it's easy to read that as a metaphor for this old corruption. I mean, this is probably why Corrosion ended up turning into this, because of that sort of association. But it's easy to read it as this old corrosion in the family. But reading it as a metaphor, this is my complicated issues with metaphors. And this is sort of where the transposition came in, is the scientist studying the corrosion, ends up going back to her family estate. She comes from a family of old money, um, and sort of interaction with her siblings. And that's sort of the dynamic of the elementals. Is this dramatic interaction with siblings. A couple of them get killed by the elementals, and so they're investigating the mystery of this other house. And all of these, elementals with physical bodies that look like their family and stuff like that. It's really scary, nicely scary. So I'm putting sand in this old house for a different reason, but sort of riffing on that. But uh, but yeah, it's easy to read as a metaphor, and that I have lots of problems with metaphorical readings because uh, if you see something just as intensely visceral as that basic concept, as really essentially terrifying as that basic concept of elementals with physical bodies who want to kill you, the automatic response is to reduce that stimulation, and one of the mechanisms for reducing the stimulation is metaphor. Um, I don't think it harms the elementals too much because those two parts really marry together well enough so that just dismissing it as a metaphor for the corruption of old money or something like that doesn't ruin it too much if you just keep in mind they're still really scary monsters. I may be unique in my distaste for metaphor, however, as a writer, I would say that's a danger you could fall into is if you have this great idea for this really intensely scary sort of ghostly monster type of character, and if you have an easy metaphor, complicating that metaphor will enhance the stimulation of the visceral image. But the thing about the elementals, and this is a side issue, the thing about the elementals that's obnoxious, um, and I listen to it on audiobook, and I just wanted to shout, "Stop doing that! It's really annoying." But there's an African American character, and the narrator just kept calling her the black woman, and he wouldn't stop, and he wouldn't listen to me when I told him just stop doing that. That's really annoying. I kept wanting to say she has a name. She has a name. Um, and there's some tropey things there that are really obnoxious, and it's one of those things where it's hard to really identify that as a universal flaw in that particular text. It is a really small part of the book. It makes me hesitant to recommend it to people sometimes, and I have to sometimes say, "Oh, there's this great scary novel about these ghostly monstrous characters called elementals." But the narrator really obnoxiously refuses to use this woman's name, just calls her the black woman, and it's so annoying. Yeah, I just call those poison pill issues. A lot of workshops are really fixated on those. This thing will be distracting, therefore cut it out. That particular one is so easy to cut out that I would personally go back there and edit it because it's nothing really overtly racist about it. It's just just that one thing, the way he talks about her, just in that one way. And it's sort of like it's a far worse example, I would say, but it's heartbreaking because Little Nemo in Slumberland is a comic. In the zeros, I'll talk about comics. Little Nemo in Slumberland is such a beautiful, beautiful comic. The paneling is just gorgeous, and the colors, and even something like that, just the visceral appeal of just something as beautiful as Little Nemo in Slumberland has the same basic biomorphic visceral stimulation because it's sort of just sprawling all over the place. Traditional. It was very influential in its panel design. So traditional paneling in comics would be fairly rigid. And Little Nemo and Slumberland just broke that paneling and did all kinds of crazy stuff with the paneling. This huge panel here and lots of little tiny panels here. Panels would bleed over into each other. You have this really repetitive paneling, and then it will sort of collapse. Just beautiful things with the paneling. But it has this African character, and I can't read it because of this one character. Very stereotypical depiction of this one character, and I can't recommend it. I mean, it's everything else about the comic is just so beautiful. It's so tragic that this one thing just ruins it, unfortunately. That's sort of like with the elementals. It's, it doesn't quite get up to the level of Little Nemo in Slumberland in terms of just racist stereotypical depictions. It's just that one little thing. He just keeps calling her the black woman, and it's annoying. So yeah, I mean, it's a great one to read, but it's a very scary novel. And the way Michael McDowell really frames the elementals, it's really good at building suspense and mystery, and paralleling the actual family drama. It doesn't get too, for me at least, doesn't get too soap opera-y. Nothing wrong with soap operas. Soap operas are great for what they are. However, if a novel with the family drama gets really soap opera-y, it sort of, just personally, I lose interest in it. Doesn't get too soap opera-y with the family drama. Sort of perfectly balances. And you have these two houses side by side. One has the elementals and one has the family. And that sort of visual image of balancing them together. But yeah, I don't know. I say this whenever I talk about any of these stories, but this is an ongoing project for 29 stories in a project called the Opal Bean War. Working title. I'm not sure if we're going to stick with that as the title. And whenever I mention one of these, I say, I have no idea where it's going. Sound off in the comments if you have any idea about where I can take that story or whatever. But so going forward, I might reference these because I'm going to be presenting on the Opal Bean War fairly soon. Hopefully, maybe. But also NaNoWriMo starting. I have no idea what am I going to write for that either. We'll see. Hopefully it's something that's halfway decent. We will see. We will see. We will see. Alright, see you as the dogs gather. The biomorphs are consuming me. Help me. The elemental biomorph. I can't survive. Save me from the elemental biomorphs. Ah, no.